Morning, Iris Langford found out someone had been systematically draining her company's escrow accounts. She was sitting in a hospital waiting room with motor oil on her sleeve and a stranger's child asleep on her shoulder. She hadn't planned any of it. Not the oil, not the child, and certainly not the news that would arrive 20 minutes later via text message from her CFO. 4 words that made her stomach drop straight through the linoleum floor. We have a problem. But that's not where the story starts. It starts 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning in October, when the freight elevator in Langford Capital's downtown Chicago office decided to stop working between the 14th and 15th floors, with Iris inside it, a board presentation in 40 minutes, and absolutely no patience left. She pressed the emergency button. She called the building manager. She stood in that metal box for 11 minutes reciting quarterly projections under her breath like a prayer, and when the doors finally groaned open on the wrong floor, the 13th, which the building had optimistically relabeled 12B, she walked out into a hallway that smelled like sawdust and found a man lying flat on his back under a junction box, a flashlight clenched between his teeth, humming something that sounded like a Johnny Cash song. He didn't hear her come out. "Excuse me," she said. He tilted his head sideways without getting up. Dark eyes. A jaw that needed a shave by about 3 days. He pulled the flashlight from his mouth and said, calmly, the way someone might comment on the weather, "Elevator again?" "Yes." "Which floor were you trying to reach?" 15. He sat up slowly, looked at the junction panel, and shook his head the way a doctor shakes his head when the X-ray confirms what he already suspected. This relay's been compensating for faulty contactor since August. Surprised it lasted this long. He stood wiping his hands on his work pants. He was taller than she'd expected. "I'm Cole Whitaker, building's electrical contractor." Iris looked at her watch. 38 minutes. "Can you fix it?" "Already did," he said. 15 minutes ago. The elevator should be running. The issue is, whoever called it on 16 overloaded the secondary circuit, pulling it back up. He looked at her directly. No particular deference, no particular awkwardness, just a man with information. "If you take the stairs to 14, the main elevator bank on that side will get you to 15. I could have 12B's elevator back online in about 20 minutes. She took the stairs. She made the presentation. The board approved the Delacroix acquisition unanimously. She didn't think about Cole Whitaker again until Thursday. Thursday was when she found the note. It had been slipped under the door of her private office, not her assistant's desk, not the reception suite, but her actual office, which required a keycard and a secondary PIN sometime between 7 and 8 in the morning before her assistant arrived. A single sheet of paper, typed. No signature. The escrow review for the Delacroix deal. Look at the third-party transfer logs for September 14th through 22nd. Compare them against the confirmed wire confirmations. They won't match. Iris read it twice. Then she picked up her phone and called her CFO, a careful, methodical man named Bennett who had worked for her for 6 years and had never once in those 6 years raised his voice. He raised his voice on Thursday. "I'm looking at it right now," he said, and she could hear the particular silence of a man trying very hard not to sound panicked. "Iris, someone routed $2.3 million through a shell intermediary and backdated the confirmations. This was done from inside. The access logs show an internal terminal." She sat very still. "Whose terminal?" A pause, longer than it should have been. "That's the thing," Bennett said. "The login credentials belong to your brother." Elliot Langford was 41 years old, vice president of strategic partnerships at Langford Capital, and the only family Iris had left after their mother died 4 years ago. He had their mother's eyes and their father's charm, and a gambling debt that Iris had paid off twice without telling anyone, because that was what you did, she had told herself. That was what family meant. She didn't confront him immediately. That was the discipline. That was the thing that separated good investors from great ones. The ability to sit with uncomfortable information and not act on it before you understood the full shape of it. Instead, she called a private forensic accounting firm and asked them to start from the beginning. And then, because the building's electrical contractor was apparently also scheduled to do a full panel inspection on floors 12 through 16 that week, she kept running into Cole Whitaker. The second time was in the stairwell on Friday. He was coming up with a toolbox and she was going down with cold coffee and the particular expression of someone who had not slept. "Still the stairs?" he said. "Elevator's fine now. I prefer the stairs." A pause. "How did you know the elevator was running before I told you it was broken?" He considered that for a moment. The vibration signature changes when the contactor misfires. You can feel it in the wall panels on 12B if you know what you're listening for. He shifted the toolbox. I'd been monitoring it for 2 weeks. Filed 3 reports with building management. They kept pushing the repair window. So you fixed it yourself? On my own time. On a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. He said it without resentment. It seemed like the kind of thing that would strand the wrong person at the wrong moment. She looked at him for a second longer than she meant to. How long have you been doing electrical work? 14 years. Owned my own firm for the last 6. What did you do before? Something moved behind his eyes. Not evasion, exactly. More like the careful choice of how much to offer. I was a structural engineer, he said. Commercial and industrial. I left to be home more. A slight shift in his expression. My daughter was 3. Her mom had just. There were circumstances. It made more sense. Iris understood the architecture of that sentence. The things that fit inside circumstances when you didn't want to explain them to a stranger in a stairwell. How old is she now? 7, he said, and his entire face changed. Just slightly, just at the corners. She's 7. The third time was not in the building at all. It was a Sunday, which Iris normally spent at her desk because the office was quiet and she could think, but the forensic accountant had sent a preliminary report at 9 a.m. and she needed air, so she had walked to the coffee shop 2 blocks from her building and ordered something she didn't care about and sat down to read. Cole Whitaker was at the counter. He had a child with him. Small, dark-haired, deeply serious in the way that 7-year-olds are serious when they have been given the important job of choosing what kind of muffin to get. She pointed at the blueberry, reconsidered, pointed at the lemon poppy seed, looked at her father. He nodded with the gravity of a man ratifying a treaty. The lemon, she told the barista. Iris watched this without meaning to. He saw her when he turned around, a brief flicker of recognition. Then he guided his daughter to a table 2 away from hers. The girl immediately took out a small sketchbook and started drawing, the muffin untouched beside her. She draws before she eats, he said, not quite to Iris, not quite to himself. Every time. What does she draw? Right now? Buildings. She wants to be an architect. He said it the way parents say things like that. Equal parts pride and bemused wonder, like they're still not sure how this specific person ended up in their care. Iris looked down at her preliminary report. The numbers were not improving. Can I ask you something? She said, and wasn't entirely sure why. He waited. If you found evidence that a system had been deliberately compromised, not a malfunction but intentional interference, designed to look like a malfunction, what would be the first thing you look for? Cole set down his coffee. He didn't ask why she was asking. He didn't look at her like she was strange. He thought about it for 4 or 5 seconds with the focused quiet of someone who takes questions seriously. Access points that weren't in the original spec, he said. Anything added after initial installation. Most sabotage looks like it belongs there. Same wire gauge, same connectors, but the routing is wrong. It goes somewhere the original design didn't intend. He paused. You not asking about electrical systems? No. He nodded slowly. Same principle applies though. Find what shouldn't be there but was made to look like it belonged. What shouldn't have been there was a secondary authorization pathway that Elliott had apparently built into the wire transfer system 18 months ago. Timed to activate only during large acquisition closings when internal transaction volume was high enough to obscure small discrepancies. It was elegant in the awful way that betrayals sometimes are. It had routing built in to mimic standard compliance confirmations. It would have worked for years. It had already worked twice before Iris found out. 2 previous acquisitions. Smaller amounts. The forensic team found those on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the note appeared under her office door. Iris sat with that information for 6 hours before she did anything. Then she called the only person she had told about the note. Her VP of legal, a woman named Harriet Vance, who had been practicing securities law for 22 years, picked up on the second ring and said, I've been waiting for this call. You knew? I suspected. 3 months ago, during the Morrow Street closing, I flagged an irregularity in the third-party intermediary payments to compliance. The report was never actioned. I looked up who cleared it. A pause. It was Elliott. Iris closed her eyes. We go to the SEC, she said. Yes. Not internal, not the board first. directly to the SEC and simultaneously to the U.S. Attorney's Office, because if there's any chance he has contacts inside the regulatory review chain, we can't give him advance warning. She had thought this through. She'd been thinking it through for 11 days. And Harriet, I want the self-report filed under my signature. Not legal's, mine. A silence. That will invite personal scrutiny, Harriet said carefully. I know. It'll also make clear that I didn't know and that I acted the moment I found out. She opened her eyes. I'm not protecting my reputation here. I'm protecting the company and every client whose money sits in those escrow accounts. What happened next took 3 weeks and was largely not dramatic in the way that people imagine financial crime exposure to be dramatic. There were no shouted confrontations. There were no tearful admissions. There was a very quiet meeting with federal investigators in a conference room that smelled like recycled air, and then a morning when 2 agents appeared at Elliot's apartment building at 7:15 a.m. And then a week of silence while Iris ran her company and did not sleep well and read her forensic accountant's updates at intervals like checking a wound. She did not see Cole Whitaker during any of that. She thought about the conversation in the coffee shop more than once, the principle of finding what shouldn't be there but was made to look like it belonged. She thought about how he had said it without drama, like a man describing how to read a blueprint. She wondered, not for the first time, what kind of structural engineer voluntarily walks away from a career to rewire junction boxes in a building on South Wacker Drive. The answer arrived inadvertently on a Saturday morning in the hospital waiting room. She had been walking past the parking structure on Michigan Avenue when she heard it, a sharp impact, a child's cry, and then the particular controlled chaos of a bystander situation that needs someone to take charge. A boy, maybe 8 years old, had fallen off his bicycle on the inclined parking ramp, and the cut on his knee was bad enough that his mother was pale and shaking and not managing to apply pressure correctly. Iris had taken wilderness first aid certification 8 years ago because a business associate had suggested it would be good for the executives at Altitude fundraiser they were doing for cardiac research. She had never used it for anything. She used it now. She got the bleeding under control, and she stayed with them until the paramedics arrived, and then somehow, the mother was still shaking, the boy was frightened and needed a familiar face. She found herself in the waiting room of Northwestern's Prentice ER, her silk blouse ruined, an 8-year-old half asleep against her shoulder because he had decided she was trustworthy and was not interested in revising that decision. It was in that waiting room that her CFO's text came in. We have a problem. And then, because the universe has a particular kind of dark comedic timing, the door opened, and Cole Whitaker walked in with his daughter, who had a splinted wrist and tear-stained cheeks and was holding it together with the concentrated dignity of someone who has decided that crying is now finished. He stopped when he saw Iris. She looked up from her phone with motor oil. It must have been from the bicycle chain. On her sleeve, someone else's child on her shoulder, and the expression of a person managing 3 crises simultaneously. "Jungle Jim," he said, nodding at his daughter's wrist. "Yours?" "No," she said. "Bicycle accident. He's fine. He just wanted someone to stay." Cole sat down 2 chairs away. His daughter leaned against him and closed her eyes immediately. He looked at Iris's phone, at the expression on her face, and did not ask. "My brother has been defrauding my company," she said, and was surprised to hear it come out like that. Flat. Factual. Like reading a line from the forensic report. "How long?" "At least 2 years, probably 3. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. I self-reported to the SEC 3 weeks ago. This is," she looked at the phone, "this is something else. Another account they found this morning." She expected him to say something careful, something managing. Instead he said, "How are you doing?" She blinked. "I mean that as an actual question," he said, "not a pleasantry." No one had asked her that in 3 weeks. Her board had asked about exposure. Harriet had asked about optics. Bennett had asked about quarterly projections. Her PR team had drafted 4 different response statements and asked which voice she preferred. Nobody had asked her how she was doing as an actual question. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think I'm still in the part where you keep moving because moving is the only thing that makes sense." He nodded, like that was a complete and understandable answer. His daughter stirred, opened her eyes, and looked at the boy asleep on Iris's shoulder with the frank assessment of a 7-year-old encountering a new situation. "Is he okay?" she whispered. "He will be," Iris said. The girl considered this. "My dad fixes things," she said, with simple certainty. "When something's broken, he figures out why and then he fixes it." Cole looked at his daughter with that expression again, the corners, the quiet pride, and didn't say anything. His name was in the acknowledgments of 3 peer-reviewed structural engineering papers. Iris found this at 11:30 that night when she was doing what she was apparently doing now, which was conducting informal background research on a building contractor who had said one useful thing in a coffee shop and one genuinely decent thing in an emergency room. The papers were about load distribution failure analysis in high-rise commercial construction. The third one, published 9 years ago, had his name second on the author list. She looked up the first author, searched the name alongside Whitaker, found a wedding announcement from 11 years ago in a Naperville community paper. She stopped reading there. That was his story, not hers to excavate. But the papers were there. The expertise was real. 14 years of electrical work was a choice, not a default. There was a version of Cole Whitaker who could have gone in a very different direction, and he had surveyed his options and chosen the one that let him be home when his daughter needed him to be there. She thought about what that cost, what it required to make a choice like that and not resent it. She closed her laptop at midnight and slept better than she had in 3 weeks. The Delacroix acquisition closed successfully 6 weeks later, after a 90-day audit process that Iris had voluntarily initiated on every transaction her brother had touched. She testified twice. She gave a deposition that lasted 4 hours. She sat in front of her board on the Thursday morning and walked them through everything, not a managed narrative, not a PR version, but the actual sequence of events, including the note she couldn't initially explain, and the forensic trail, and what it had cost, and what it had revealed. The board voted unanimously to retain her. The vote was 7-0, and it took less than 4 minutes. Her CFO cried, which he would deny if asked. Elliot was formally charged on a Friday in December. Iris did not attend the proceedings. She sent Harriet. She herself spent that Friday at her desk, reviewing due diligence protocols she was overhauling for the entire firm, because the right response to a system failure is to build a better system. It was late afternoon when her assistant said there was someone in the lobby who didn't have an appointment. He says his name is Cole Whitaker, her assistant said, with the careful neutrality of someone relaying information they find mildly intriguing. He says he was doing the annual panel inspection on 12 through 16, and he found something on 15 you should know about. Iris lifted up from her monitor. "Send him up," she said. He came in with the same toolbox and the same unhurried directness, and he looked around her office with the specific attention of someone reading a space structurally. The load-bearing walls, the electrical conduit paths, the things most people never notice. "There's a relay junction behind the southwest wall panel on this floor," he said, setting the toolbox down. "Whoever installed the conference room AV system 2 years ago ran unauthorized conduit through a shared chase. It's been drawing inconsistently from the same circuit as your server backup system. If the load spikes during a large meeting, your backup system drops offline for about 90 seconds. She stared at him. "The original conduit installation was permitted and inspected," he continued, "because she hadn't said anything. But whoever did the AV run-through afterward didn't pull a secondary permit, so it's invisible in the official record. It's there. I can fix it. But I wanted you to see it first. Something added that wasn't in the original spec," she said slowly. "Made to look like it belonged." He paused. A slight shift. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Exactly like that." She stood up from her desk and walked to the window. Chicago in December, low gray sky, the lake invisible in the distance behind the buildings. 3 months ago, she had been standing in a stopped elevator telling herself to stay calm. 3 months and 1 demolished family relationship and 2 federal depositions and 1 vote of confidence and a 14-year decision made quietly by a man she hadn't understood at first. "Your daughter's wrist," she said. "How is it?" "Healed. She's already back on the jungle gym." A pause. "She drew you a building, actually, a few weeks ago. I wasn't sure if that was." He stopped. "It's in the truck. I wasn't going to bring it up." Iris turned around. "I'd like to see it," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and she was aware that this was the first time in this particular room, in this particular context, that the balance between them had shifted, not collapsed, not been overwhelmed by circumstance or obligation, but shifted, the way weight redistributes when someone decides to stop standing on ceremony. "I'll get it," he said. "Give me 5 minutes." "Cole," she said. He paused at the door. "The relay junction. Whatever cost to fix it properly, bill me directly, not building management." He nodded once. "And the next time you file a report about a failing contactor," she said, "you should know that I sit on the building's tenant advisory board. I was elected in September. I would have listened." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. Not wide, not performed, just the real thing in the unguarded moment before he caught it. "Good to know," he said, and walked out to get his daughter's drawing of a building Iris hadn't seen yet, from a 7-year-old who had decided simply and without revision that her father fixed things. She straightened her jacket, looked out at the gray December sky, and thought that some systems, when you rebuild them correctly, turn out to be stronger than what you had before. There's a moment in this story that I keep coming back to. Not the boardroom, not the federal deposition, not even the vote. It's the moment in the hospital waiting room when someone asked Iris how she was doing and actually meant it, and she didn't have an answer ready, because nobody had asked her that in 3 weeks. That detail says everything. I think about what Iris did when she found out about Elliot, and I think the easiest thing, the most human thing, would have been to quietly fix it. Move the money back, restructure quietly, protect the family name. Nobody would have known. That path existed. She could see it clearly. She didn't take it. She picked up the phone and called the SEC, and she signed the self-report under her own name, not her legal team's, not the firm's, hers. That's not a legal strategy. That's a character decision. That's someone who understood that the short-term cost of honesty is always smaller than the long-term cost of pretending something didn't happen. Every action she took after finding that note had a consequence, and she chose to let those consequences fall where they belonged, even when some of them fell on her. What I find remarkable about Cole is not the structural engineering papers, not the expertise hidden under 14 years of electrical work. It's the decision that preceded all of it. He looked at a version of his life that probably looked impressive from the outside, the research career, the trajectory, and he set it down, not because he failed at it, because something mattered more. And then he showed up every day to a job that didn't announce itself, filed reports that nobody actioned, fixed relays on his own time at 6 in the morning, and did not resent any of it. There's a kind of intelligence in that which doesn't show up on a resume. It's the intelligence of knowing what you're actually optimizing for. Most people spend years chasing metrics that belong to someone else's definition of success. Cole had already done the math and arrived at a different answer. His daughter told a stranger in an emergency room with complete confidence, "My dad fixes things." She didn't say he used to be an engineer. She didn't say he gave something up. She said what she knew to be true about him in the present tense, from 7 years of watching. That's the measure. I think what this story is really about is what happens when 3 things are present at the same time. The willingness to do the right thing even when it's costly, the clarity to see a problem for what it actually is instead of what you want it to be, and the endurance to keep moving when you're exhausted and the outcome isn't certain yet. Iris had all 3. Cole had all 3, expressed differently, in quieter circumstances. The fraud got exposed not because justice is automatic, but because someone built those qualities into the structure of how she operated, so that when the moment came, the response was already there. Systems built on shortcuts fail eventually. The ones built on something real tend to hold. Iris said it herself. At the end, some systems, when you rebuild them correctly, turn out stronger than what you had before. I believe that. I've seen it be true.